Hey, Daily Dosers, happy Thursday. Good to be with you today. Hey, here's what I know. The last few months of our lives have been really hard. And there are times in our lives that feel as though that life is sort of dried up. It feels as though we are wandering in the desert. We are wandering in the wilderness. And here's what I want you to know tonight. When you find yourself in the deserts of life, you are not alone. In fact, it's in the desert that God is closer to you than you could ever imagine. I was reading a story the other day from the Bible. It's a story that we call the Exodus. God's people had been slaves in Egypt. And if you're familiar with the Christian story, you know that God used Moses to free God's people from slavery. But think about where God sent them. God sent them from slavery out into the wilderness. And there they wandered, it says, for some 40 years. I've always found that story to be sort of curious. Until I started looking at the original text of the Bible. When you become a pastor, you learn the language of Hebrew. And so I was looking at some of the words that are used to describe things like the desert. And get this, the word for desert is spelled the very same way as the word speaks. Think about that. The word for desert is spelled in Hebrew the very same way as the word speak. And I thought about that a little bit, and I got kind of curious about that, and I wondered, and I remembered, if you will, that it was in the desert that God spoke to Abraham. It was in the desert that God spoke to people like Moses through a burning bush. It's in the desert that God spoke to David. It was in the desert, the wilderness, that God spoke to John the Baptist. It was in the wilderness that God spoke to Paul. It's in the wilderness, actually, that Jesus went before he started his public ministry to hear from God. You see, the word for desert and speak in the Bible are the very same word. They're spelled the very same way, and I think there's some intention to that. The other thing you should know about that ancient Hebrew language is that the word for speak, if you take the root word of the word for desert is the same word that forms the root of the word that was used in the Bible to describe the place where God dwelled, the Holy of Holies. The root word for desert is the same word that's used in the Bible to describe the place where God dwells. I think that's kind of interesting when you think of your life and mine, that often the desert is seen as a bad place. Those wilderness experiences in our lives are often seen as a place we do not want to go. But in the Bible, the wilderness was the place. The desert was the place where God dwelled, where God lived, where God spoke to God's people. You see, we find the wilderness to be a bad place, and our question is, when am I ever going to get out of the desert? But I wonder if a better question is, what? What am I going to get out of this desert? You see, I think it's in the moments of our lives when we find ourselves in the desert that we busy ourselves with trying to get out of that wilderness rather than wondering, what is God teaching me in the midst of this wilderness? In the midst of this time since March when COVID has sort of taken over our lives and turned things upside down, what is God teaching us about ourselves, about our schedules, about the importance of relationships, about the economics, in the midst of the desert of what's become a racial tense country these days? What is God teaching us, about our politics, about who we are and how we relate to people who might be different than us? You see, so often we're asking, when are we going to get out of this desert? But I think what God would want us to wonder is what? What am I going to get out of this desert? You see, well, folks, here's what I know. It was true in the Bible, and I think it's true for you and me as well. When we find ourselves in the desert, we are closer to God than we ever are. We're closer to God in the desert than anywhere else. In your life, and in mine. Have a good night.
As I walk this great unknown, questions come and questions go. Was there purpose for this pain? Did I cry these tears in vain? I don't want to live in fear. I want to trust that you are near. Trust your grace can be found in both triumph and tragedy. I have this hope in the depth of my soul. In the flood or the fire, you are with me and you won't let go. But sometimes my faith feels dim, like the night will never end. Will you catch every tear, or will you just leave me here? I have this hope in the depth of my soul. In the flood or the fire, you are with me and you won't let go. 'Cause I have this hope in the depth of my soul. In the flood or the fire, you are with me and you won't let go. Whatever happens, I will not be afraid. 'Cause you are closer than the breath that I take. You calm the storm when I hear you call my name. I still believe that one day I'll see your face. 'Cause I have this hope in the depth of my soul. In the flood or the fire, you are with me and you won't let go. 'Cause I have this hope in the depth of my soul. In the flood or the fire, you are with me and you won't let go. 'Cause I have this hope in the depth of my soul. In the flood or the fire, you are with me and you won't let go. In the flood or the fire, you are with me and you won't let go. In the flood or the fire, you are with me and you won't let go.